Labeling your sewing machine. Let's go through the parts. First, we're going to start up the top here. This is what we call a spool pin. This is where the thread goes. We then move across to the first thread guide, which is where the thread goes. It then comes down here to the number 2 thread guide, and then across this way to the take up lever. This is a moving part, take up lever. The thread then comes down behind a very small hook just above the needle, and here we have the needle. To hold your fabric or paper, whatever you're sewing in place, we have the presser foot. This moves up and down as we need it to. Now moving across to the dials and the settings that you will need to check before you start doing any sewing. First of all, at the top up here, we have the pattern selector. This changes the type of stitching. We only ever use the selection that is closest to you or down the bottom of the pattern selector. Moving across to this dial here, it moves, and you'll see on your machine there's 2 red lines. That is the tension selector. That changes how tight the machine sews each stitch. Moving down now to these important dials here. The first one at the top, there is actually 2 separate sections. The first one is on the outside, and that moves separately to this one here. So on the outside, we have the stitch width selector. This is how wide the needle moves side to side as the machine sews. We're only ever going to use 0 because we sew in a straight line. We don't want it to move side to side. So stitch width. This one in the middle, if you watch closely the needle as I move this, you can see that the needle is also moving side to side. This is the needle position. It should be straight up and down. The next dial we have here, you need to label it the buttonhole selector. This is if you're an advanced sewer and you want to make a buttonhole, but put a do not touch next to this. We never use this dial. I'd also like you to do the same for the bottom, right? Do not touch. This is to do with the type of stitching and whether we want to sew on top of each other for quilting or darning, it's called. Right, do not touch on this bottom dial. This one here is an important dial that we do use. It does 2 different things. It winds down and up next to the little numbers that are on the other side here. This is the stitch length selector. How long we want the machine to make each individual stitch. So 1 is very small, 5 is much longer. 2.5 is the standard, halfway between, so right in the middle of the numbers, 2.5. The other function of this dial is to reverse. If we push this up and hold it up rather than twisting, it makes the machine go backwards and stitch in reverse. So this here needs to have 2 labels, reverse stitch and stitch length selector. The last parts that we need to identify are down the bottom here. This is a little opening where the bobbin sits. So we're calling this the bobbin flap. We also have a foot pedal and cord and a sewing machine cover. That's all the parts of the sewing machine.